Before I begin, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I'd always love knowing which cities my stories travel to, whether it's someone listening from a quiet porch in Ohio, or a cozy kitchen in Texas, or maybe a little apartment in New York where the sound of traffic hums in the background. And if this story finds its way to your heart, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Not because you have to, but because it helps me keep sharing these little pieces of real life that make us all feel a little less alone. Now, let me tell you about the evening everything changed for me. It was one of those slow, golden afternoons that slip quietly into dusk, when the air smells faintly of cut grass and oil, and the world feels like it's taking a deep breath. I'd gone into the garage to tidy up a few things, or maybe just to escape the noise of the house. Sometimes, even at 58, you crave silence like it's a friend you haven't seen in years. The light slanted through the small side window, cutting across the dust and glinting off old paint cans, garden tools, and the hood of my husband's old truck. That truck had been sitting there for months, half finished, half forgotten. He used to talk about fixing it up one day, but life has a way of filling your hands with other things. I remember I had an old rag in one hand, wiping down a shelf, when I heard the door creak. The one that opens to the driveway. "Hey, Lisa," a familiar voice called. It startled me at first. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I knew that voice. It was Tom, my husband's oldest friend. They'd known each other since high school, though I'd only really gotten to know him in the last few years. He was one of those people who carried a calm with them, the kind that fills the air before a summer storm. "Tom, you scared me half to death," I said, pressing a hand to my chest as I turned around. He smiled, that quiet, easy smile he always had. "Didn't mean to. Your husband told me I could borrow the drill. He's out, isn't he?" "Yeah, he went to the hardware store. Should be back soon," I replied, gesturing toward the tool rack. "It's right over there, if you can find it in this mess." He stepped further inside, the sunlight catching in his hair, and for a moment the air felt heavier, not in a bad way, but in the way time seems to slow when you notice something simple yet meaningful. Maybe it was just the quiet, or the way the evening light made everything look softer. "You've kept this place organized," he said, scanning the shelves. "Better than the last time I saw it." I chuckled. "You should have seen it a few weeks ago. It looked like a storm hit it. I just needed to keep busy, I guess." Tom turned toward me, his expression thoughtful. "Still keeping busy with everything going on?" He didn't mean anything by it, but the question hit deeper than he probably realized. My husband had been distant lately. Not in a cruel way, just distracted. We'd fallen into a rhythm of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoes in the corners of a house. I shrugged, pretending to fuss with a wrench. "You know how it is. Some days, it feels like I'm talking to the walls more than to anyone else." Tom nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "Yeah, I get that." Something about the way he said it, simple, sincere, made me look at him differently. Maybe it was the first time I realized he carried his own kind of loneliness, too. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the garage, the smell of engine oil and dust, the low whir of a fan. Everything felt still. Then he said, "You always had a way of keeping things together, Lisa, even when it's hard." I smiled faintly. "I don't know about that. Sometimes I think I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing." He leaned against the workbench, the drill in his hand now, not making a move to leave. That's all any of us do, really. Pretend until it feels real. The way he said it, it wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was more like recognition, the kind you feel when someone sees through the layers you've spent years building. The light outside shifted again, fading from gold to amber, and I could see the sky turning the color of old peaches through the window. I don't know why I remember every little detail of that moment, the sound of his voice, the slow rhythm of his breath, the way the air felt charged with something unspoken. Maybe because it was the first time in a long while I felt seen. We talked for a while, about small things at first, the truck, the weather, his garden that refused to grow tomatoes this year. But then the conversation drifted, as conversations sometimes do when two people stop pretending everything is fine. He told me he'd been feeling lost lately, that his own marriage had ended quietly last year, like a light fading out. No fights, no anger, just absence. And I told him I understood that kind of silence more than I wanted to admit. When my husband's car finally pulled into the driveway, the spell broke. The hum of the engine snapped us both back to reality. Tom smiled again, that same gentle way, and said, "Guess I'd better get going before he thinks I'm stealing his drill." I laughed, though my throat felt tight. "Yeah, better not give him ideas." He paused at the door. "Hey, Lisa, thanks for the talk." "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. After he left, I stood there for a while in the fading light, listening to the crickets start their evening chorus. I could still feel the quiet warmth of that unexpected connection. Not wrong, not forbidden, just human. Sometimes life doesn't surprise you with big moments. Sometimes it's just two people standing in a garage at sunset, realizing that even in the middle of ordinary days, something inside you can shift. And that evening I think it did. That night, long after the sound of my husband's car had faded into the quiet rhythm of our house, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. The clock ticked softly on the wall, that same old sound that used to make the house feel alive, but now only marked time passing. I kept thinking about the garage, about Tom, about how simple that conversation had been, and yet how much it stirred up in me. It wasn't attraction, not really, or at least not the kind we talk about out loud. It was something gentler, a reminder that I could still feel, still listen, still connect. It had been a long time since I'd felt that. My husband came in, tired from his errands, muttering something about the store being out of the screws he needed. I smiled, nodded, asked if he wanted dinner. He said he wasn't hungry. And then he disappeared into the living room, the soft blue light of the television spilling through the doorway. I sat there a while longer, listening to the house breathe. There are different kinds of quiet. There's the peaceful kind, like the calm of an early morning before anyone wakes up. And then there's the other kind. The kind that feels like standing in an empty room where the echoes of what used to be love still hang in the air. The next few days passed without much thought. Life, as it always does, carried on. I did the laundry, watered the plants, met a friend for coffee. But the memory of that evening lingered like a scent you can't quite name. Every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing toward the garage, half expecting to see Tom's truck parked outside. It wasn't, of course, but a few days later it was. I was out front trimming the roses when he pulled up. He waved from the driveway, that easy, open smile on his face. "Hope I'm not interrupting your gardening empire," he said, stepping out of the truck. "Not at all," I replied, brushing soil off my gloves. "You're lucky. I was just about to surrender to the weeds." He laughed, and something about that sound felt like sunshine after too many cloudy days. "I came to return the drill," he said, holding it up. "Figured I owed you at least that." "Come on in," I told him, opening the garage. "I'll make sure it finds its way back to the right shelf, if I can remember which one that was." He followed me inside, and again that familiar quiet wrapped around us. The smell of oil, wood, and dust. The slow hum of the old fan in the corner. We talked again, this time longer. About small things at first, then deeper ones. His voice had a steadiness that made it easy to talk to him, like he'd known how to listen all his life. He told me about his daughter, grown now, living 3 states away. He said he missed her laugh more than anything. I told him about the early years of my marriage, how everything had felt so simple back then, how laughter used to fill our home without us even trying. It wasn't dramatic or sad exactly, just honest. Two people talking about life the way you do when you stop pretending you have all the answers. At one point, I asked him, "Do you ever wonder when things started to change?" He looked at me, thinking it over. "All the time," he said quietly. "But I think sometimes things don't really change. We just stop paying attention." That stayed with me, because I realized in that moment how much I'd stopped noticing. The light in the mornings, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth in my husband's laugh that used to fill me up. When Tom left that afternoon, he said something I didn't expect. "Lisa," he said, standing in the doorway, "you should paint again. You used to, didn't you?" I blinked at him. "How did you know that?" He shrugged. "You just seem like someone who would. Someone who sees the little details." It caught me off guard, not just because he remembered, but because he was right. There had been a time when painting was my whole world. I used to spend hours in the garage, canvases spread out across the floor, music playing while I tried to capture light and color and feeling. But life, as it often does, had pushed that part of me to the back shelf, behind everything else that needed doing. After he left, I stood there for a long time staring at the empty space he'd been in, and something inside me whispered, "Maybe it's time to find yourself again." That night, I went rummaging through the old storage boxes in the corner of the garage until I found my paints. The tubes were dry, the brushes stiff, but they were still there, waiting. I set up an easel by the window and started small, just a few brush strokes at first, then more. The smell of the paint filled the air, and as the colors began to take shape, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet joy, a sense of being alive. My husband noticed the mess the next morning. "You painting again?" he asked, half smiling, half surprised. "Yeah," I said softly. "I just missed it." He nodded, then turned back to his coffee. I could tell he didn't really understand, but that was okay. For once, I wasn't painting for anyone else. As the days passed, I kept going. And sometimes Tom would stop by again, always with some small excuse, a borrowed wrench, a question about the truck. But I knew, and I think he did too, that it wasn't really about tools or chores anymore. It was about finding pieces of ourselves in the spaces we'd both forgotten to look. And though nothing was said and nothing was crossed, something inside me was waking up, slowly, gently, like morning light creeping through the blinds. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just waiting for life to happen. I was part of it again. The weeks that followed felt different, though I couldn't quite say why at first. Maybe it was the smell of turpentine in the garage again, or the streaks of color drying on old canvases that had gathered dust for years. Or maybe it was just that I'd started paying attention again, to the way light changed across the day, to the sound of birds outside the kitchen window, even to the tone in my husband's voice when he came home tired. It's funny how, when you start to wake up to your own life, everything around you starts to shift, too. My husband noticed, of course. One evening, he came into the garage while I was painting, still in his work clothes. He stood there quietly for a while, watching me lay down color on the canvas, the outline of a tree against a wide, empty sky. "You've been out here a lot lately," he said. "I guess I have," I answered, smiling faintly. "Feels good to do something with my hands again." He nodded, but there was something uncertain in his eyes. "It's nice," he said after a moment, "seeing you happy like that." And then, almost as quickly, he turned and went back inside. It was strange, not painful, just unfamiliar. For so many years we drifted around each other like planets caught in quiet orbits. Now I was doing something that didn't involve him, and maybe he didn't quite know where to stand. A few days later, I heard a knock on the garage door. Tom again. He leaned against the doorframe, casual as ever, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured the artist could use a refill, he said. I laughed. You've got good timing. He set the cup beside me and looked at the canvas. That's beautiful, he said. You've got a way of catching light that feels calm. I turned to him. Calm, huh? I was aiming for wild. He grinned. Then maybe that's just what I needed to see today. We stood there quietly for a while, the kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. I realized how comfortable that had become, just being around someone who didn't expect me to fill every gap with words. He told me he'd started volunteering at a community garden across town. Keeps me out of trouble, he joked. But as he talked about it, I could tell it meant more than that it gave him a purpose again. Something about that struck me. We were both trying, in our own ways, to rebuild the pieces we'd lost. At one point he asked, "You ever think about teaching? I bet people would love to learn from you." I waved it off at first, but the thought stayed with me. Teaching. I hadn't thought of myself as someone who could do that. Yet the next morning, when I looked at my half-finished paintings, I caught myself wondering, maybe I could. The following week, I did something unexpected. I called the local senior center and asked if they ever ran art workshops. The woman on the phone sounded delighted. "We've been trying to start one for months," she said. "Would you be interested?" I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. It felt terrifying and wonderful all at once. That rush you get when you remember there's still more to you than the roles you've been living in. When I told my husband, he looked surprised but said, "That's great, Lisa." His tone was kind, if a bit distant. Maybe he didn't know what to make of it, or maybe he did and just didn't have the words. That night, as I prepared materials for the first class, I thought about Tom, about how he had nudged me, without even trying, toward something new. The first session at the center was small. 5 women around my age, all nervous, all apologizing for not being real artists. I laughed with them, remembering that same feeling from when I first started. By the end of the hour, there was laughter, a few smudged canvases, and something warm blooming in my chest. Afterward, I walked out into the crisp evening air and saw Tom waiting in the parking lot, leaning on his truck. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I said, grinning. "They even want to come back next week." "I told you," he said softly. "You've got that thing that makes people want to try again." For a moment, we just looked at each other, 2 friends, 2 lives slowly finding new meaning in old routines. As he drove away, I felt a quiet gratitude settle in me, not for anything dramatic, but for the way small kindnesses can pull a person back to themselves. That night, when I came home, my husband was already asleep on the couch. I covered him with a blanket, turned off the TV, and sat for a moment beside him. We'd both grown older, quieter, maybe even more apart, but I realized something. It wasn't too late to rebuild. The bridge between 2 people can be repaired if both are willing to notice the cracks. Maybe that's what this whole chapter of my life was about, noticing. And in that still house, with the faint scent of paint still on my hands, I promised myself I'd keep noticing. The laughter, the quiet, the chance to begin again. Because sometimes life doesn't need to start over completely. It just needs you to remember that it's still happening, right here, right now, one small moment at a time. It's strange how seasons change quietly when you're not keeping track. One day you wake up, and the air has a different weight to it. The mornings are cooler, the light softer, the trees already thinking about letting go. By the time autumn rolled around, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt new but comfortable. I taught my art class twice a week at the senior center. The women who started out afraid to hold a brush now teased each other about whose sky looked more dramatic. Their laughter filled the little room with a kind of joy that stuck to you long after you left. At home, things were gentler, too. My husband and I weren't suddenly transformed. We still had quiet dinners and long silences, but something between us had softened. He'd started asking about my classes, about the people I met. Sometimes he even came to the garage to watch me paint for a few minutes before heading to bed. It wasn't fireworks. It was something smaller and steadier. A slow thaw. One afternoon, while cleaning my brushes, I saw Tom's truck pull into the driveway again. I hadn't seen him in a couple of weeks. When he stepped out, I noticed how the sun caught the silver in his hair, the way time catches all of us without asking permission. "Thought I'd check in on the artist," he said, smiling as he walked up. "Come on in," I replied. "You're just in time. I made too much lemonade again." He laughed, following me into the garage. We sat there for a while, sipping from old glasses, the air warm with that lazy late afternoon quiet. "How's the class going?" he asked. "Better than I ever imagined," I said. "You know, I was scared to do it at first. But it's funny. Once you start doing the thing you love, fear doesn't stand much of a chance." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It suits you. You've got light in your face again." That comment sat between us for a while. Not uncomfortable, just true. I set my glass down and looked at him. "You know, Tom, I never thanked you for that first day in the garage. You probably didn't realize it, but you reminded me I still had something inside me worth finding again." He shook his head lightly. "I didn't do much. You just needed someone to hold up a mirror for a minute." I smiled. "Maybe, but you did." We talked a little longer, about the truck he still hadn't finished fixing, about his garden, about how he was planning to visit his daughter soon. The sun dipped lower, painting everything in a soft amber hue. And as we talked, I realized something simple but important. Not every connection in life has to be a grand, sweeping story. Some are meant to nudge us back to ourselves, to remind us that it's never too late to feel alive again. When Tom finally stood to leave, he looked at the painting I'd been working on, a quiet road winding through a field of golden trees. "That one's new," he said. "Started it yesterday," I replied. "I call it The Long Way Home." He smiled. Fitting. I watched as he drove away, the sound of his engine fading into the hush of the evening. Later that night, after dinner, I went out to the garage again. My husband followed me this time, standing behind me as I adjusted the canvas. He looked at the painting for a long moment before saying softly, "That's beautiful, Lisa." "Thank you," I said, turning toward him. He hesitated, then added, "I didn't realize how much you'd missed this, or how much I missed seeing you like this." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. There was no grand apology, no sweeping declaration, just truth, raw and simple. I reached for his hand. Maybe we both forgot to notice for a while. He nodded, squeezing my fingers. Maybe.